confession. I was cleaning my windshield on my 1990 Crown Victoria LTD at a Walmart parking lot at 8th Street in Colorado Springs, Colorado. My wife was in there shopping, and I was leaned all the way across the hood, cleaning the windshield, and I never saw it. All I heard was a motor revving and the wheels squealing, and my car was struck head on, nose to nose, while I was laying on the hood. It knocked my Crown Victoria, which was in park with the parking brake on, about 6 to 8 feet backwards. It totaled the car in the parking lot, and then it knocked me back on top of another car behind me. I fell back on it, rolled over the hood, bounced off the fender of another car, and then hit a concrete lamppost in the parking lot, and I was unconscious. So I came to, and I was in the hospital quite a while. And then about 2 weeks later after that, very close to that hearing that was scheduled, I left physical therapy. I was walking on a cane, very disabled, barely able to walk. And I was walking out to my car in the parking lot, and parked on the road by the parking lot was a Colorado Springs police cruiser, and the motor was running. And they floored the motor. The car jumped the curb. There were sparks everywhere. It was coming straight at me. I was about to be crushed between that cruiser and my car. And at the last minute, he swerved sideways, and they threw rocks all over me. And sitting in the front driver's seat was ATF agent Blake Butler, dressed in a Colorado Springs police uniform. And he was about 4 feet away from me, and he pointed directly at me, and he shook his finger, like threatening me, don't, shut up. So I was pretty shook up. This was the second time I'd almost been killed by a car. So I drove home, and I came here, and I was with my wife and young son watching a movie. And I heard a car out in the front yard, and I walked out, and I looked, and it was Harold Leonard in an SUV, the guy that offered me the job to bomb the Murrah building all that time back in October '94 for $1 million. And I thought they were going to kill me for sure. And so I didn't want my son to see his father shot and carry that memory the rest of his life. So anyway, excuse me. I went out the front, and I was fully expecting to be killed. And so I walked up to Harold Leonard, and he rolled the window down, and he had his hands on the steering wheel, motor running. And I said, Harold, what is it? What's going on? And he said, look, if you go into court and you testify and you tell anything about the Murrah building or any of those ops we pulled, because the Murrah building wasn't the only thing we were involved in. And he said, if you do that, we've been ordered to kill you. And then he pointed up to my house, and he said, we've been ordered to kill your family too. And I just came to, tell you. And then Harold leaned his head down on the steering wheel, and he said, and he leaned back up, took a deep breath, and he said, it's nothing personal. And I said, well, thank you, and he left. And so by that time, I realized that I couldn't win this game. So I called my attorney, Harvey Steinberg, the next day. He's the Denver Broncos football team's attorney. And I told him I wanted to switch my plea to guilty. So we met Assistant United States Attorney Greg Goldberg, and we went up there. And Greg Goldberg said, look, I'm getting a lot of heat on this case. He said, I don't know what's going on with this. There's some real funny stuff happening here. He said, you just pick a charge, any charge, I don't care which one, and you're out of here. And it all goes away. So I pointed to the indictment. I didn't really care what I was pleading guilty to. It didn't matter. I was still alive. And so I pled guilty to dealing firearms without a license, which is a Class 4 felony. I turned my licenses in. My Class 3 machine gun licenses, my Class 1 licenses, all been turned into ATF, all my records. Everything was perfect. So they charged me with this thing. It's really ridiculous. But anyway, I pled guilty, and it all went away. And I kept quiet all these years. I thought that if I could get away from this, and Bill and Hillary Clinton would ever be out of office, and that I could maybe come forward and add my story to the research that, trying to figure out these false flags and how they all came about. So I'd been in Supermax solitary up there beside Timothy McVeigh just before he was executed, and the guards were trying to be bad to me. They took out my mattress. They took everything away. I had a pair of skivvies, nothing else, no clothes, no shirt, no blankets, nothing. I slept on the concrete floor because it was a lot better than the steel bed there. And they left the lights off for days. They didn't give me showers, sometimes for as much as a week. And I was afraid to eat the food. I thought the CIA was going to poison me and kill me to shut me up, since I had guilty knowledge of the Murrah building. And so I suffered quite a bit in there, but I got really weak. And finally, I had to eat the food. I didn't have any choice. And I ate it and all, and luckily I wasn't poisoned. But yeah, that's the basic timeline of this story. And there's a lot more to it, of course, here. But I was planted with false evidence. I turned the job down to bomb the Murrah building. 2 years later, I talked to an undercover ATF agent. They recorded it on tape. The CIA stepped in, took the tapes, hushed the case up, ordered me planted with evidence, threw me in there, ramrodded me through the show system. I mean, I never, ever had a motions hearing, ever, in 4 years. I mean, justice was totally raped. And the cover-up was perpetrated by Bill Clinton's appointee, Tom Strickland, and George Bush's nominee, District Judge Nottingham. Now, after all this was done, Ole and Alfred, then later, after I pled guilty, Judge Nottingham himself had to resign his judgeship because he was caught red-handed in a sex scandal with prostitutes in Denver. So the judge himself was dirty. The U.S. attorney was dirty. The CIA was dirty. The ATF was dirty. And so I'm lucky to be able to tell this story. When I was struck in that parking lot, I was in bad shape. My doctor told me, he said, "You're very lucky to be alive." So this is the story, the basic story. And if there's any questions, I can fill in. This book it's got a lot of stuff in it. I can talk about anything you guys want to talk about. Waco, we knew some people that were directly there that knew David Perez. I got a lot of information about Centaur Rose in Arkansas because we were in those ops. So anything that you guys might want to, ask or talk about, I'll be happy to tell you what I know.
I would really like to hear more about the Clintons' background, your involvement. Did you ever meet them? Did you meet Dan Lasseter, the accomplice? And often when I hear you talk about these things, you talk about satanic things. Would you mind just fill us in a bit?
Well, I was a petroleum and research geophysicist at Amoco Production Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the early 80s. I had about 19 people working under me, and we were in charge of offshore projects, a Beaufort Sea project in Alaska, offshore China, Saudi Arabia, different things. So that was a good civilian front. And my black ops handlers liked that because I didn't have any ties to the military. I didn't have any records. I had a good civilian job with a perfect record. So they had me running operations and stuff there. That way, if I was ever caught, I would just look like a criminal, a regular old criminal with no ties to the military, the CIA, or anything. I was the perfect cover is what they told me. So we were running ops over there in Arkansas, getting stuff out of the armories, bouncing them around safe houses at farms. Then we were taking them places. Other people would pick them up sometimes. Sometimes we'd take them to Arkansas. And, there were mortars and C4 and det cord, various things that went down to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters. But during that time, the Clintons were there, and Hillary was running the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, and hence the Operation Centaur Rose. There were two more multiply nested ops there, Jade Bridge and Screwworm. Jade Bridge was an op where they were bringing up Nicaraguans and training them, the Contras, how to fly small aircraft, 172 Cessnas and so forth, out in the rural area there in Arkansas. And then the Screwworm op was one centered out of Mexico City, I believe, where they were building, manufacturing illegal automatic weapons and stuff to help arm. And so I was just in the Centaur Rose op, and Bill Clinton was governor, and my higher ups told me that as Barry Seal and them were taking the arms down into Central America, they were bringing back cocaine. And at the height of the operation, it was approximately $100 million a month. And that was 10% of that Black Ops money was going to Clinton. That's what they told me. So they were pulling in about $10 million a month, and that's the money he used to run for president. Meanwhile, they had to wash the money. Clinton was using his front as governor of Arkansas to conduct and cover up these, not conduct, but to cover up all this stuff. And they washed money through banks in Little Rock. Then they went, the James McDougal and Susan McDougal Whitewater scandal and the banks there, all that was involved. The money went to the Worthington Bank in Atlanta, and from there to the BCCI Bank out in the Caymans, the Bank of Commerce and Credit International out there. And when this whole operation was shut down and the cover-up of the op began, Secretary of State Kerry, new Secretary of State under Clinton, but back then he was just Senator John Kerry. He led the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission investigation on the BCCI Bank, and the records were all sealed, and all that money that was washed through there, everything was sealed up in a black hole. So anyway, the Clintons were doing a bunch of that stuff, and while I was telling this story to Blake Butler on the tapes up on back in Operation Stingray in April 20th of 1999, I had told him that I had met Kathy O'Brien, the CIA sex slave, and she had been on a speaking tour with Mark Phillips after she wrote that book, Transformation of America. You can find that on Amazon. And that Kathy O'Brien had sex. She was a sex slave at CIA, and she'd been brought down to Little Rock and had, sex with Bill and Hillary Clinton. And she had a daughter named Kelly, who was 7 years old, and Bill Clinton had sex with her during that time. And I was telling all this to Agent Butler. I didn't know he's an undercover and everything. And so the CIA sealed all this stuff up because it's true. That's why they confiscated the tapes, and everything's whisked off in a black hole. So anyway,
Cody, can I ask you, were Bill and Hillary first CIA and using the governor post as a cover, as a front, or was it the other way around?
No, I don't have any actionable intelligence that Bill and Hillary Clinton were actually CIA agents or anything. What I was told is that they were working for the CIA as far as providing cover for these operations. Now, the CIA was operating legally according to President Reagan. He had given them orders from the President of the United States to conduct these operations, Centaur Rose, Jade Bridge, Screwworm, to support the Contras in Nicaragua. So the CIA was doing what they were told. They were doing their job. But at that point, Ole, the CIA was operating domestically. And that's illegal because in 1999, during that, in 2001, after the 9/11 towers went down and the Patriot Act was passed, that restriction on CIA about operating, forbidden to be operating domestically was lifted. But this was back in 1980s, mid-80s, 83, 84, 85. And CIA was not legally correct in operating. So that's why it was a black op. Is there any questions?
No, yeah, I would.
Right. Could I jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Cody, hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions because actually, a little bit later, I actually taught for a while at I taught at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. I taught journalism there, and Bill Clinton used to come around jogging around the house where I was staying there. So I'm a little bit familiar with the area. And number one, I have a couple of questions. One is, could you tell us about the Mina Airport? Because I have heard tremendous amount about the Mina Airport. One is that Clinton was providing cover for plane loads of China white heroin coming in from China, from, the Golden Triangle area into the Mina Airport in, major airplanes and of the 747 category. And that Walmart was involved in these, and the orders, that is, Walmart trucks were involved in the distribution once the China white was brought into Mina Airport, and then the orders were just a step back because it was a CIA operation. Is this at all within the realm of possibility?
Yeah, that's certainly within the realm. That's great that you say that, because that could have been a parallel op. Here's the op that I know about myself and had firsthand knowledge, was all the cocaine coming back from Central America. Barry Seal was running Rich Mountain Aviation. That was a front company. Barry Seal had been pilot in Vietnam. He trained with the 20th Special Forces Group in '63 at Fort Benning, I believe. And after he got back from Vietnam, he was a pilot. He started that Rich Mountain Aviation, contract CIA pilot. And they were flying. He was using, his favorite plane was a C-123 transport plane, the predecessor to the C-130s. And they were taking big loads of weapons down there and then bringing the coke back. And they had a distribution network. The distribution network that I know about personally, I absolutely know it's real. They were using Tyson food trucks. Okay. And the Tyson food trucks, refrigeration trucks, they'd be loaded up with the coke, and it would go around to regional hubs like Kansas City and Dallas and so forth. They were doing that because down in the 80s, if you guys recall, around Florida, that was a big cocaine capital, all the cocaine cowboys and all the coke that was coming in there. Now, my girlfriend, she's laying here asleep right now. She worked at one point, had dinner with Pablo Escobar down there in Miami, and was working a little bit down there. So that was a big thing going on down there, and all the domestic law enforcement like DEA and all of them were concentrating in Florida. So it was a perfect op to bring the coke up here to Arkansas. So anyway, the op I know about was the Tyson food trucks, and they would distribute that. One of my associates, who I will not name, he is still alive now. He had a deep sea fishing outfit in New Zealand, and Don Tyson contracted with them to provide trips for the executives and higher ups. And he actually met Bill Clinton a few times and stuff. And they asked me if I wanted to meet Bill Clinton, and I said definitely not. I didn't. We were black ops. We didn't want to be around any high-profile politicians or anything like that. But that cocaine was going all over. It's going through Tulsa, Dallas, all over the place. And that's the op I know about. Now, there could have been a parallel op with the China white heroin, because a lot of the same players from Vietnam, namely General Richard Secord and CIA agent Thomas Shackley, those guys were involved in a lot of that triad, or so-called China white heroin, back with Air America and all that. And then after Vietnam, after they left Vietnam in '75, these same players appeared down in Costa Rica and all that in Central America. They were actually banned for life for all their activities from ever coming into Costa Rica. So there could have been a China white thing running parallel with this. I do not know about that myself. What I do know about is the arms going to Nicaragua and the cocaine coming back, because I was involved in that.
Right. Now,
can I just,
yeah, sure.
Alfred, can I just fill in that Ted Shackley was one of the heads of Operation 40. Barry Seal was in Operation 40. Secor was in Operation 40, and so on. So we have the same players there as well. And George Bush Sr. was the paymaster of Operation 40, Group 40. Do you remember we've spoken about this ultra-secret hit team that were part of the JFK assassination? Robert Kennedy, Che Guevara, John Lennon, so many of these hits as well. So we're back to the same players again in this area as well.
Well, yeah, this is where it gets interesting, and I want to say something. The thing we used to operate under, you admit nothing, you deny everything, and make counter accusations. And this is where it gets real interesting. When Centaur Rose was running, I was told they were washing $100 million a month, okay, through it in cocaine. I don't know how many millions in arms, but I was also told that Bill Clinton got 10% of the Black Ops money for running front as governor, and he appointed the state medical examiner. That way, when they were cleaning this up, this was a big weapons and drug op, and so when they were cleaning it up, they had to whack out the lower echelon. That's standard CIA procedure in an op like this. They kill off all the witnesses and eliminate potential blowback, and then the case officers and agents pick up and go to another country or somewhere. But when they were shutting this op down now, Barry Seal got planted with evidence too by the DEA. And on February 19th of 1986, Barry Seal was shot. He was at a federal halfway house, I believe in New Orleans, and he was on work release where he went out during the day and worked his job, and he came back at night, and it was about 5 in the afternoon or so when he was reporting back, and he pulled up in the parking lot, and in broad daylight there were 4 Colombian hitmen with 9mm MAC-10 machine guns, no ski mask, no gloves. They walked up on him, and they machine gunned him to death in his car. And so when they searched the trunk of the car, the private number of George Bush Sr., the ex-director CIA, was found in the trunk. And so later on, after Seal died, now also on that day, on February 19th, 1986, the exact same day, down in Colombia, they had between 25 and 30 cartel guys and related drug dealers all assassinated on the same day. Amongst them was a guy named Pablo Carrera, the number 2 guy in the Medellin cartel. And Jorge, I believe his name was, Ochoa, one of the Ochoa brothers. And so this was a big cleanup op. They're cleaning up all the guys supplying the dope down there. They were cleaning up all the people that were selling it up here. And then they had murdered the main pilot, Barry Seal, that had been flying it. And so later on, after this time, Barry Seal had a favorite plane, and it was a 1982 Beechcraft King Air 200. And it was found later to be on the Crawford, Texas ranch of George Bush Jr. The reason we know this is someone saw the FAA number, which was N63085, and had a serial number of BB1014. And that had been over at Rich Mountain Aviation, registered to Rich Mountain Aviation, to Barry Seal. And after he died, it disappeared and then showed up magically at George Bush Sr.'s. This story was broken by a good friend of mine named Michael Rupert. He was an ex-LAPD narcotics officer. And during that time, he had discovered that CIA was moving drugs through LA. And it's all on tape. People can YouTube video this, Google it up. He confronted CIA director about this illegal narcotics trafficking. I mean, that was his job. He was an LAPD narcotics officer. And he told me personally that every time they got big, they would get closer and closer to big guys. They'd set them up and get closer to the big guys trying to bust them. He said the CIA would tell them to stand down and not bust certain people. So they were protecting their own guys. And so this whole thing it's ongoing. I mean, they just pick up from one op and go to the other. They had ops in Southeast Asia, moving the opium crop there. They got more ops going on right now in Afghanistan. That's the world's largest opium crop this year, 2017. So this is just worldwide drugs and arms ops, and some of our highest politicians are in it. And
Cody, can I fill in a little bit there?
Yeah.
One of the other pilots in the Iran Contra scandal next to Barry Seal is CIA whistleblower Chip Tatum, who later worked as a hitman under George Bush Sr. in Operation Pegasus. And he told me that he overheard Oliver North give the order for Barry Seal to be killed in Baton Rouge, exactly like you exposed. And that assassination happened just 1 week before the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme, that had just given the very same Oliver North the finger, because Ollie North was over in Sweden trying to get the Swedish Prime Minister to sign the end certificate order, fake end certificate order for some Stinger missiles. And Olof Palme just said, you know, bugger off, out of here. It's the Olof Palme assassination is massive. It's an incredible assassination. But this was just 1 week after the assassination of Barry Seal and all the other drug dealers down in Latin America. And it was just the first in a long, long line of cleanup assassinations, I would suggest. And one of the people that were part of the hit in Sweden against the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme was a man called Felipe Vidal Santiago, who is very close to Operation 40. He's the guy that he's very close to the Umbrella Man when JFK was assassinated. He's the Cuban guy that sort of steps out in the street right before the shots are fired, next to the so-called Umbrella Man. And he, 23 years later, was in Stockholm trying to recruit assassins for the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister. Same players again and again.
This is great stuff. And Alfred, I've never met you, sir, but it is wonderful to talk to you because, see, you're giving us a piece of the pie here about your time in Little Rock, hearing about that China White. I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, in those ops, just like Ole said, it's hard for civilians to understand this stuff. When I was in a black op, I didn't want to know any more than what I needed to know. That way, if you get tortured, you're not going to give up your guys and all that kind of thing. But you've put this piece of the puzzle here about the China White. I don't have any knowledge about that, but it could have very well have been going on parallel to the ops with Barry Sadler and the cocaine and the drugs. The Mena Airport was a hub, a big activity of covert ops. And so that very well could have happened. That's the first time I ever heard of that. But do you have any more information about that, Alfred?
Well, not currently, but I could go back to a person that I know who may well have more information on that, and I could I could communicate that to Ole, and Ole could get that to you. I have one other follow-up question, and it's this: if you look at both the Alfred P. Murrow building as a false flag and the 9/11 as a false flag, both of them involve the demolition of a building. I mean, you know, just as a rough as a design, and you know, and so there's a psyop element around both, which is the demolition of a building. And I'm just wondering if you had ever, either at that time or afterward, heard of any connection between the CIA structure or whatever, any connection between the Oklahoma City bombing and 9/11, either the people that were planning it or whatever.
Well, that's a real good question. And before we get to that, I've only got about 25 more minutes. I have another interview, but I want to go over this thing real quickly. A lot of people we haven't covered yet is why the Murrah building was bombed, okay? That's the thing everyone asks. What was going on? Why this big op? Why all this stuff? And so I'm gonna go through this. If it's okay, I'm gonna go real fast.
Sure.
And I'm going to lay this out. Okay, we have to go back a little background. In 1980s, Saddam Hussein was a CIA paid asset, and he was involved in a war with the Iranians. And during that war, Iran had about a 10-to-1 infantry advantage in soldiers, and we were afraid that he may overrun them. And Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense at the time, he went over there and provided satellite intelligence to Saddam and so forth. So the war was over, but during that war, since we were afraid they'd be overrun, we covertly and secretly armed Saddam Hussein with a lot of things, but one of them was the Ames strain of anthrax. That's a weaponized form of anthrax from Fort Detrick, Maryland. It has a small particulate size and an altered protein coat to make it more infectious. And so he had that stuff. So you fast forward and the Iran war was over, and then he invaded Kuwait. Well, George Bush and them were getting a lot of heat from the Saudis. They didn't like Saddam Hussein doing that and figured they were next. So they put pressure on us to stop that. Now, Bush and them knew they had to go in and demonize our former asset, and they knew that they had covertly armed him with this very serious pathogen. And so what they had to do next was they were going to send our troops in there, and the standard anthrax shots we gave to our troops was a 6-month course, one per month, to build immunity. So they didn't have time to wait 6 months. So they did a crash course. They created a brand new anthrax vaccine with a new adjunct called squalene. The flu vaccines, they had mercury-based aerosol or aluminum adjuncts in them. And an adjunct, for the listeners, is it's a thing that goes in a shot that boosts the body's autoimmune response. So it makes the vaccine adhere and causes adhesion a lot better. So anyway, they came up with this brand new experimental vaccine with squalene. They used a company like Bioport to produce them. The first lots of this was given to pilots at Dover Air Force Base. They were getting nausea, headaches, all kinds of autoimmune stuff. Well, anyway, 480,000 of our troops went over to Desert Storm. This was in January of 91. And so they had these shots, and this was brand new stuff, and it was causing all kinds of problems. Well, the second thing that happened in Desert Storm was that the very first conflict the United States had ever used depleted uranium munitions. We had uranium-238 munitions in the 30-millimeter rounds in the A-10 Warthog tank busters. They were in the Sabot rounds of the M1A1 Abrams tanks. And by the way, Timothy McVeigh was a tank commander there. He won a Bronze Star for confirmed kills. So anyway, during that conflict, these new types of ordnance were being used, and they have a real high kinetic energy. There were fireballs being formed, and the uranium-238 in these weapons was forming new compounds with the high heat and everything, like uranium dioxide. And the particulate size of these particles that were falling down after the fireballs were about 4 microns. And so our MOP gear, standard NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical gear of our troops here in America, were about 10 microns. So as you can see, they were breathing all this stuff, and it was going right through the filters, and it concentrates in the thyroid and the testicles of a man. So our troops would come home, and they'd make love to their wives, and this low-level radiation would be transferred from the semen into the females, and then into their offspring. And so the Pentagon had this huge problem on their hand, just like the Agent Orange problem in Vietnam. This low-level radiation doesn't show up for generations. They didn't know how many generations it would be transferred from, son to daughter, granddaughter, and so forth. And so this was a big problem. It never been done before. Soldiers were all getting sick with Gulf War syndrome. And a few years after the war in 91, there was a senator named Chris Shays, Republican from Connecticut. And this senator's on an Armed Services Committee. He was tasked with determining medical culpability for our veterans. A lot of them were sick, and some of them died, but it was a combination of the squalene and the vaccines, and they waived FDA testing for these vaccines before they gave them to our troops. So all this is in the book. I have lot numbers, dates, times, places, all kinds of stuff. I'm just trying to go through this, kind of quickly. So anyway, make a long story short, Chris Shays was given the task. So he ordered FBI to go collect all the records of all these servicemen. There's approximately 480,000 of our guys, Marines, Army, all of them. And then they came back, and guess where those records were stored? In the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And when these records were destroyed, are you guys still there?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.